Steve Dotto here. How the heck doing this fine day? Welcome to Webinar Wednesday. Sitting next to me in today's webinar is not April, but is our guest Mike Vardy, who I'm thrilled is joining us. How you doing, Mike?
I'm doing well. How about you, Steve?
I'm doing pretty good. Well, I'm reasonably well. Our topic today, everybody, is my procrastination problem terminal, which is I imagine most of the people attending today experience some form of procrastination. So, and I don't know if it's been exacerbated by the pandemic, but I certainly feel that it's I don't have that great a handle on my procrastination issues. So I thought I'd get Mike to help me. Little did I know that Mike would turn this into an object lesson, and he would procrastinate getting his presentation to me until about 10 minutes ago, which is actually, I'm exaggerating, about an hour and a half ago. So I'm not sure we should take advice from this guy at this point here. I'm just, this whole webinar is kind of just, it's on a knife's edge, to be perfectly honest with you. It's on a complete knife's edge. So your content better, because I didn't have time to review all your content before, so you better be good, Mike. I'm just saying. Do you have anything you want to, do you have any mea culpas you want to do?
So let's first off, I deliver some mea culpas inside of the presentation as well.
Oh,
so
good.
when you, yeah, so they're
As
there.
you were recording it, you knew you'd procrastinated.
There was a good degree of intent behind the procrastination, and we can discuss it afterwards as well during the Q&A. Okay. And as you're watching, so I want like you said, it's an object lesson. There's an experimentation level going on within the presentation itself. So I hope you get a kick out of it. Something different that I wanted to try,
Okay.
and we'll see how it turned out. But I mean, there's a level of trust here. You know, I'm going to
here at DottoTech, we appreciate you using us as guinea pigs. Oh, so before we begin, let's fill everybody in on this. What's going to happen today? April is with us, but she's in chat, so she won't be on camera today. She won't be here next week either. She's going off to visit her son in Colorado somewhere. He's off skiing, learning to become a ski instructor somewhere in the center of the country. So April will be missing next week. Next week we have another guest. Tim Schmoyer is going to be joining us. We're going to be talking about the future of video. So that's what's happening as far as that goes. Mike has pre-recorded his presentation as is normal today. So we are going to jump into that video in just a few moments. It's not too long, just a little over 20 minutes, so it should be fairly quick. And while it's going on, Mike and I will join you in chat. If any of you have to leave for any reason, if you get kicked off the internet, if the interwebs are not working, or the dog pukes and you have to go clean something up, then you don't worry. We will be sending out a replay tomorrow, and that replay will be available for a week after. Those of you who are regulars here on Webinar Wednesday know that we deliver these tutorials free each and every week, and then we give and then we archive them for our patrons, because DottoTech is a community-funded channel supported through the generosity of so very many of you through the crowdfunding site Patreon. So a great big shout out and thank you to all of our patrons. We would not be here without you, so we appreciate you incredibly. That's kind of the details. So procrastination, Mike. That's going to be the. You ready?
Yeah. Oh, I'm totally ready. I mean, do you want me to just do a little bit of preamble before we do the video?
Do you want to do a preamble before? Yeah, if we had gotten together early enough, we could have talked about this.
Well, no. So actually, it came up. Somebody in the chat already mentioned this, and I think this is actually a really good point. Procrastination is closely related to perfectionism. Not enough time to do it right. One of the things that I touch on during the presentation, and I think, you know, I don't think I know that it's part of the process, is the biases that show up, the cognitive biases that show up completely during the kind of processing that we're trying to do with all of these intentions that we're trying to pay attention to. So that comment is accurate. And one of the things that I think we should try to do is, again, beat back those biases. So you're going to see during the presentation, I'm going to share with you 3 things that you can do. And I've got a nice mnemonic in there and all that stuff to help you try to beat back that procrastination so that you get out of the prison that procrastination can provide. So I saw that pop up and I'm like, let's address this now, because it's a nice little segue into what we're going to talk about.
I appreciate that you titled it The Procrastination Prison, because I have a complete fondness and an affection for any alliteration that is possible. So well played, Mr. Vardy, sir. So well, let's do this.
Yeah, let's do it. Yep.
let's jump into the video. And while it's going on, you will be in chat. And yeah, and I'll ask you all the questions afterwards. I'm just curious to dive in. So here it is, Mike Vardy on the procrastination prison. We will see you folks on the other side. We'll be in chat.
All right,
in the
thanks,
meantime.
Steve. Really appreciate the introduction, and I appreciate your patience with what I'm about to share with you. So I just want to show you something, all of you that are watching this right now. This is me literally a few hours ago. In fact, you'll see timestamps as I present today, and it's going to absolutely probably floor you, but also it will give you a sense of how ironic and timely that this conversation, this presentation is happening today, like what's going on with it. So I am here to talk about the prison of procrastination and realistically how it can really cause you issues when it comes to your personal productivity. But there's a lot more nuance to procrastination that you may not realize. I'm going to showcase right now the several books that I have on procrastination. This one is called Soon by Andrew Santella, an overdue history of procrastination from Leonardo and Darwin to you and to me, as illustrated by that first shot that I showed you in the keynote presentation. I've got The Power of When, or When by Daniel Pink. I've got Thank You for Being Late, an optimist guide in the age of accelerations. I've got from Gregory McEwen's brother, Dr. Max McEwen, Now, The Surprising Truth About the Power of Now. I have Juliet Funt's A Minute to Think, Reclaim Creativity, Conquer Business, and Do Your Best Work. I've had Juliet on my program before. And I have Frank Portnoy's Wait, the Art and Science of Delay. I've also talked to Dr. Timothy Pitchell, who's a fellow Canadian who studied procrastination. Procrastination is a big deal. And while it is something that we will face time and time again, myself included, as illustrated by this very presentation, there are ways to make sure that it's not something that is going to be debilitating and sustained over a long period of time. So I'm going to share with you this prison that we're in. There are three elements, three ways that I believe that you can, tap into to break free of procrastination when it's not something that you're doing on purpose. Rory Vaden has this book called Procrastinate on Purpose. And let me be clear, not all procrastination is bad, right? It's not all bad. But when we let biases creep in, and we're going to talk about some of the biases today during this presentation, when we let that stuff creep in, we run into the issue of it becoming terminal, where it becomes the rule rather than the exception. So you can leverage delay and being deliberate and procrastination when done aptly and appropriately. But when it becomes habitual, when it becomes terminal, or it seems to become terminal, that's when we run into problems. So I'm going to share with you these three ways today. And what's interesting is the word procrastination, there has been jokes around this before, right? The idea of, I'm a professional procrastinator, right? Like I've gotten so good at it that I'm a pro at it. Right? This idea of delay, procrastinate. And we hear this, we've struggled with this from when we are, in school. My daughter has struggled with procrastination recently when it comes to things like, going through her English program that she's trying to take into advance. She knows that she has until a certain time to get it done, and she's delayed it and delayed it and delayed it. And I've talked about this in a TED Talk that I've done called How to Stop Time, where I say instead of worrying about due dates, DUE dates, make every day a due date, a DO date. We'll get into that a little bit, or at least touch on it a little bit in the presentation today. But procrastination can come in all shapes and sizes. But when it comes to these three ways, they spell the word pro. I've created a mnemonic that's going to help you in terms of how to have some simple, sustainable, effective, durable, maybe some flexibility and built-in strategies that are going to help you stave off procrastination. So let's get to that first one now, the letter P, the first of the three ways. And this one may seem counterintuitive to staving off procrastination, but the idea is to pause so that you can process. You need to take a beat. again, I come back to this book, A Minute to Think by Juliet Funt. Conquer Busyness is in the subtitle. What happens when we get caught up in the day-to-day, the speed, the cadence, the pace of the world, is that we don't take time to pause. We don't take a beat. We don't take a minute to think. And therefore, we can't properly process what's going on. We don't deliberate so that we can be deliberate with our next actions. And that's something that we need to keep in mind. And as I was putting this together, I went through some of my photos on my phone because I was sitting in the living room. And I'm like, hey, you know what? There's going to be some stuff in here because I've talked about it before where procrastination and this pause in particular is showcased. And here is an example as I kind of showcase this for you. So this happened a few years ago when my daughter was at the middle school that my son is at now. And there was an emergency drill, and you can't even see the school in a distance. And you could see here that I'm there waiting, and there's a ton of people here, just from all walks of life, all students, all of us there to pick up our kids. But I said, I'm really glad that I watched This Is Water this morning. And you may not have heard of This Is Water, but it's a commencement address given by the late David Foster Wallace. I actually have the book of it, and my niece did a needlepoint of it, which I can share with you later on in the presentation if you'd like. But it says This Is Water. It's about a goldfish, and the idea of the idea is that these fish are swimming in water, and he goes, "How's the water?" And the fish is like, "Well, what's water?" Because they're so wrapped up in their own thing that they don't recognize that there's water surrounding them. And again, I'm being very glib or reductive about it. But the idea is that we don't know what other people are going through. And by sitting there and not getting caught up in all the emotions and pausing and just taking a bit of a break and taking a deep breath and going, okay, well, this isn't necessarily what I think it is. Let's not get all caught up in this. Let's process this a little bit more. And taking that pause can be really, really powerful. The other thing that we need to do with the pause is it allows us to stave off egocentric bias. Now, what egocentric bias is it's the tendency to rely too heavily on one's own perspective or have a higher opinion of oneself than reality. So when I go back to that photograph, myself was the most important in that lineup, although there are hundreds and hundreds of kids in that school. When we pause, we are able to remove ego from the equation a little bit easier. We're able to process things and break things down a little bit more. We're able to make more conscious, mindful, thoughtful decisions around something, which allows us not only to move forward in the right direction, but also decide whether or not we should move forward in that direction at all, which goes back to the deliberate delay of procrastination, right? So procrastinating on purpose, right? So when we pause, we get to ask ourselves questions. Why am I not working on this right now? Is this broken down into the smallest steps possible? Putting this presentation together. Why did I delay putting this presentation together? What's the real reason? I do know the real reason. And, ultimately it boils down to I have a lot going on, and I'm like, I made a commitment to do this. I'm going to do it. But at the end of the day, was it the best commitment for me to make? And I'm being completely vulnerable and honest here. And that's what you do in those moments where you're taking the pause, right? So to that end, taking a moment, taking a beat to think, to pause, to figure things out. And it doesn't have to be a minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes. It could be 30 seconds. I actually have an exercise I do with people quite a bit. Just did it not too long ago in a live workshop session where I said, we're going to take 1 minute to do absolutely nothing. Phones down, take everything out of purview. We're just going to focus on that. And I don't give them a full minute. I did like 42 seconds. And for some people, it felt like, refreshing. But things are going on in our heads when this is going on. Even though we're not actively doing anything, there are things going on. For some people, it was super stressful. Because there was a lack of activity, it felt like I should be doing something. Things happen in the pause. So take a beat. That's one way to stave off procrastination. And like I said, it may end up being counterintuitive for you to think this way, but again, that's one of the biases, right? The egocentric bias. Well, I know more in this moment now than than anyone else would. You got to remember that when you're comparing yourself to someone else using egocentric bias, you're also comparing yourself to that past person that committed to that project, that knows what they need to do. So in that moment, sometimes we're not at our wisest, especially when we're going constantly. So keep that in mind. All right, the next, the R. The R stands for reduce friction. Reduce friction. So again, the reason it comes after the pause is because when you think about it, there is probably some friction in place that you can reduce. And that friction can be reduced maybe by breaking a project down into smaller particles. Working on this presentation, as soon as I started to break it down, let's draw some things in paper. Let's take some photos. Let's come up with some of the strategies you've had over the years and distill them down into a 20-minute or so presentation. That's reducing friction, which makes it easier for me to take the next step, simpler for me to take the next step. Again, that idea of stop worrying about due dates and make every day a due date can only really apply when you break things down into their smallest particles. And remember, I want to be clear about this. The smallest particles now may not need to be as small in the future. It just depends on how many times you've done this before. And again, some biases show up in that, but we'll get to that in a second. Again, going through as I'm building this presentation, this came up. Something I tweeted. It's challenging for everyone to focus on the process over the outcome. What works for me? Remembering that I have a far greater command over the process than the outcome. That's a way of reducing friction, right? That's when the friction stops and the flow starts. And it's funny, as we were thinking of, as I was putting this presentation together, my daughter was telling me about the whole Kanye, Kim Kardashian, Pete Davidson kind of snafu that's going on. And I went back and watched a video of Pete Davidson on Weekend Update talking about, mental illness and how taking meds is okay if you need them. And then he jokingly said, I don't want a pilot to be flying the plane and say, hey, just so you know, me behind the wheel today, it's the real me. In the context of the joke, in that bit, it's quite funny, especially when he talks about Kanye West in that moment. But it got me thinking about the Checklist Manifesto, a book by Atul Gawande, where he talks about this idea of having a checklist in place and how airline pilots have checklists and surgeons have checklists. And the reason is they don't want to miss a single step. You don't want the person flying the airplane to not have gone through that checklist and hit every note. You don't want that surgeon to go in and miss something that would have been easily fixed if they had put it on a checklist. So breaking things down is one way to reduce friction. And here's the thing, is if you don't do this, then if you don't reduce friction rather, then you run into the definite opportunity for omission bias to show up. Now, what omission bias is omission bias is the tendency to favor an act of omission, so inaction, over one of commission, action. This is where procrastination can rear its ugly head, because our brains will say, I don't really need to write that thing down because I know what to do in that moment. But you may not tackle things in that moment, working on a book, building a presentation like this. So when you create places for you to commit, when you put these intentions in front of you, as small as they need to be, you are removing omission bias, because these things that you have omitted, these pieces of inaction don't exist, and therefore you can do the things of commission, which are action. So the best way to reduce friction is to break tasks, projects really, down into their smallest particles, right? As small as you need them to be. That is another big, in fact, that's why I put it in the middle, the big tactic that you can do to reduce friction. And once you reduce friction, then you can move on to the third step. And the third step is operate. That's what O stands for, is to operate. Back to the surgeon. If you want a surgeon to go in and operate, you want precision. You want every item to be checked off before they jump in it. Precision matters, Precision really does matter. And as I was putting this presentation together, I realized I've been thinking a lot about precision lately, especially when it comes to prioritization. And so I thought, how long have I been thinking about precision? Like, how long has this been in either in the work I've written down or just waiting around in my head, percolating? Where has that been? Well, I can tell you. Oh. It's been in my head for quite some time. This article was written back in 2014, over 8 years ago, where I talk about being balance is futile and shifting is smart, which, by the way, I don't 100% agree with anymore either. I think that there is balance as part of it, but you could see like precision shows up. Now, if your car tried to balance between gears, you might still move forward, but not nearly with the same speed, precision, and energy. And then only recently I wrote down, I wonder if the key to better prioritization, and it should be lies in better precision. But again, when I'm capturing things, I don't really spell check. In other words, the more precise you are with the intentions that you have, the more attention you can give them, and that's supposed to be an M dash, or at least in a more precise way. So there's an example of getting things out of my head without precision, but wondering about precision at the same time. Now, when you have precision, you can prioritize. Failing to do that, failing to be precise, and again, that comes down to the reduction of friction, puts you in a real peril of falling prey to another bias, right? And that bias is called time discounting. Now, what time discounting does, it's also called time preference. It's the tendency to weigh present events over future events. So what happens is you search for immediate gratification rather than delayed gratification. So watching that YouTube video of Pete Davidson talking about airline pilots is a form of immediate gratification if I was just doing that for the sake of doing it, whereas putting this presentation together and delivering it is a form of delayed gratification. Writing a book versus writing a blog post. Things like that. That's why social media is so popular, because you get that immediate gratification. Inbox, 0, immediate gratification. But when it comes to bigger projects, things that you're procrastinating on, the delayed gratification is affected by time discounting. So if you, number one, right out of the gate, pause. Number 2, reduce the friction involved. And 3, then set out to operate with precision, you're going to have less of a chance of falling prey to procrastination. And again, I can't stress this enough. Procrastination will show up. It's not going to go away. It's human nature, especially because we are human beings and not human doing. So we cannot constantly be efforting and achieving and pushing things forward, big things especially. But one of the things you can do is focus on the process over the outcome. All of this leads to you focusing on the process over the outcome. When you do that, and we've seen this in sports, we've seen this with again, the idea of big creative pursuits. Dr. Dre mentioned not too long ago on TikTok, again, another social media platform, the idea of quantity over quality, and that's what he's seeing in music today. I made a song, here it is. I made a song, here it is, instead of focusing on quality, right? We're seeing that level, and I'm seeing that in productivity all the time, quantitative productivity over qualitative productivity, and there needs to be a balance. So again, I'm not suggesting that you shouldn't shoot for immediate gratification from time to time, but you shouldn't discount or forsake delayed gratification for that, because you're going to get a lot more out of that delayed gratification. Process over outcome is one of the ways to do it. So to recap, and here it is, literally a couple hours ago with my son who's home not feeling too well, here are the 3 things that you could do to stave off procrastination and keep it from becoming terminal. Pause to process. Again, taking that beat, being mindful, thoughtful before you take your next move. Reduce friction. break things down a bit. Look for where those obstacles are and remove them, either by eliminating things or breaking things down so you can see things a whole lot clearer, so that way you can operate with precision and be more precise. Now, all of this is going to take patience, right? This is not something that's going to happen overnight. And by the way, you may end up stopping somewhere along the line and not get to the operating phase. That's okay. You don't need to constantly go through pause, reduce friction, operate. You might just get to the reduced friction phase and need to take a break. But that's okay, because all three of these things are a way of you not procrastinating, making more deliberate choices, being deliberate. That's the key. When you're being deliberate, you're not procrastinating. And that's what these three elements will help you with. Now, I've got other work that I can help you with as well. And again, you can see February 16th, 10:30 a.m. Just head to productivityist.com, do. I've got a free worksheet there called the Starting Six that can help you with this as well. I want to thank you for checking out this presentation. Again, I love my iPhone. I love the way that I can thank you from my iPhone. This is such a meta photo. Thanks so much. Appreciate it. See you later.
Okay, there we go. So because Mike procrastinated getting me that video, he sent me two versions, and I encoded and uploaded the first one, which was
well, let me that's actually a great thing to bring up. So the fact of the matter is that there was a point, and I mentioned this in the chat, where the slides, I was using Keynote. I've got an A10 Mini Pro here, and it moved ahead. I'm like, oh, I've got to move this. But because my desktop went to sleep, there was this gap there. And I actually edited the video together. So the little syncing issues that was mentioned in the chat as well, those were corrected in the corrected video as well. But again, to Steve's point, because I got it to him with such a late time, that was not what he was able to deliver. So procrastination, you can see, like, there are some effects that can lead to not getting the results that the best results, right?
I wonder, Mike, you talked when you talked about the procrastination issue, and I wonder if there's a subtlety to this. I wonder if there's systemic versus episodic procrastination. Where the techniques that you talk about sound to me like they would work very well for systemic ones, where that you're constantly, so you're in a rhythm. But I personally, I go through, it's almost like I'm a manic as far as productivity is concerned. I either have lots of energy and I'm able to overcome lots of things and just plow through, or it just gets really hard. And maybe I'm thinking that I'm procrastinating at times when it's just that I don't have the bandwidth or the capacity, and I'm being extra hard on myself.
Yeah. So to that point, the pro that I'm talking about, the pause, the reduced friction, and the optimization, that works for both systemic and episodic. In some cases, the pause is, I need to take a break. I need to take a step back. The pause doesn't have to be 30 seconds, a minute, 2 minutes. It could be, I'm going to leave this aside and focus on something else that I can move forward with. But the problem is, and this is where it becomes systemic, is if you're constantly pausing and it sits there and you're like, why is this not moving forward? That's when you need to reduce the friction. So sometimes reducing the friction is taking that break. You and I talked about after this, like going to do some exercise, moving about, like that could be a way to reduce the friction. It's not always, let's break this project down into smaller parts. Let's step away and get thoughtful about it, right? So I think that ultimately most things, when you apply a systemic approach or a systemic framework, they can be applied to instances, to like these. And I think the danger is, and this is I've seen it with productivity in general, is that if a framework is too inflexible, so it's for a very specific purpose, then that's where you can't necessarily, you find, well, this didn't work this time, so it won't work next time. So I try to pull back to the broader approach of like, take a pause, reduce the friction, and then operate. And I know there's a question about the difference between operate and precise, which we'll get to, I'm sure. But I think that you don't, and I mentioned this at the tail end, you don't need to necessarily go through all three steps every single time you're procrastinating. You might just get to the point where I'm like, I'm taking a break. End of the day, right? That's a way. I mean, if you're a writer and you're a night owl like I am, and I hit a wall, the pause could be, it's time to like take a long pause. I'm done for the day, as opposed to just a brief pause. So I think it works both ways. But to your point, I think that it's about recognizing how far to go with it. Like, where do I go to the reducing friction in the operating, or do I just stop at the pause and then be okay to come back and look next time if the pause is taking too long, or I'm not moving things in the right direction? Maybe there's some friction there I need to look at.
Okay. I think this just reflects on what you just said. And Marcin is asking, what's the relation of operation to precision? Two different things, concepts, as far as I think I can think. So you were just talking about that relationship.
Yeah. So to me, the idea of precision versus operation, I think you operate with precision, right? So you could just operate. And when I say operate, I want to be clear. Operate is a synonym for taking action, right? It's for like, I'm going to act on this. I'm going to do this thing. Operate just fit within the confines of that pro element, right? But it worked nicely because operate and surgeons and precision, you want that surgeon to operate with precision. You just don't want them to go, all right, well, time to operate. It even came up in the chat that surgeons mark like the limbs that they need to operate. Like, you don't want imprecise, that kind of stuff to happen. But to that end, the more precise you're able to break something down, right? So if you're working on a book, let's say, and I know you just wrote a book, Steve, it just came out not too long ago. If you just wrote down work on book or write book, that's not terribly precise, right? It's just, I need to, and it's also going to be something that you're more likely to procrastinate on because I can't see the end goal, right? I can't check that off as done today because your brain goes, I can't finish the book today. But if you were to put write 500 words or write chapter 1 or write part of book on precision, then your brain go, okay, I can filter that in. And that's really all this is about, is filtration, right? So with precision, if you're operating with precision, then number one, you're going to be able to move things forward a bit. I think the other thing, and this I didn't mention, is that you can run into, I'm going to get tired faster, because the more precise you are, the more likely you could run out of energy, because depending on what you're working on. But I think those things they work together. And I don't believe in the context of what I'm talking about that they are two completely different concepts.
I wonder if I could throw a different analogy in to the mix.
Sure.
And what I'm hearing from you as far as this model goes sounds very much to me like a weight loss model, where you're actually concentrating on the nutritional value and what your body needs, and kind of getting in deep to, really having a good, healthy diet and changing. I don't know, something maybe like that. The Noom is that process.
To a degree. Yeah. You could make that argument.
A lot of us don't have the capacity to have the discipline to go through those processes. So we need easy. We need low carb, or we need intermittent fasting. We need a simple set of rules to follow that says, this is when you can eat, this is when you can't eat. Now, it might not overall be as effective, but it serves. It serves because it's within the ability of the individual. So I'm wondering if part of if a solution for some of us for procrastination is as simple as us developing, a discipline that, I'm going to be constant. I'm going to be taken from 11 to 12 o'clock, and I'm going to work on the projects that are hardest to work on. And you're just going to, you're going to do whatever system is going to work for you as far as time blocking or calendar blocking, but to just put down that it's there and almost brute force it.
I would argue. So very good. That's valid. But I would argue that all of those points, like the pause can be as lengthy or as short as you need it to be. The breaking down, and this is brought up in the chat as well, can be as broad or as narrow as you need it to be, right? The Goldilocks factor. How big do you need? How small do you need to be? And the precision can fall into the same category as well, right? Because again, like I'll use an example with my daughter who's taking her driver's test today. If she doesn't take that driver's test as precisely as possible, she'll fail, right? But once she starts driving, she may not need to be as precise with certain elements of it, right? She's not, and as the more comfortable and as more experience she gets with driving, just like with grocery shopping or working on a project X, Y, or Z, or Z, let's say Z, the bottom line is that the precision isn't going to be as wouldn't say is paramount, but it's not going to be as necessary as somebody who hasn't done it to the same degree. This actually comes up in the book I addressed during the presentation, Wait by Frank Portnoy. If you're an expert in something, you don't need to, your version of precision is going to be far deeper than somebody who is not as expert in it, right? They're not going to be able to dig as deep initially, right? So I would say that there is some simplicity built into what I'm talking about. It just depends on how deep you want to go, and don't overcomplicate it by saying, well, I don't want to get that precise. Okay, well, how precise do you want to get? Oh, well, I want to work on these things that are tough for me to work on between 11 and 2, Monday through Friday. That's still a form of precision. You're saying, oh, I'm working on it from 11 to 2. Now, the argument that could come up is, I'm going to work on my book from 11 to 2, but what if you don't have the energy to work on that book? Well, then maybe it's, I'm going to work on writing from 11 to 2. So there is some scalability there. And that's what I tried to do with this analogy, because I don't want people to think, well, I have to go through all 3 of these steps. So they have to be really, really like tightly defined, like getting things done to a degree, right? They can be, you need to find what your, lack of a better term, mildness or mean is, if we're going to go with like the idea of the middle, right? And I think that when you start to think about it that way, and then you do it consistently, that's the other thing, and sustainably, then all of a sudden you're not thinking about it as much, and it's becoming as automatic as some of the other biases that can keep us from getting things done that we want to get done.
Dudley does a technique that I believe a lot of us do, which is task switching. So we look for the task that interests us more or is easier to accomplish.
That is absolutely a form of pausing, because you're pausing from the thing you were doing. So it is a form of pause, right? But again, I think the question one of the reasons I want to bring up pause is that we do tend to just go from thing to thing to thing to thing to thing without really taking a beat to even think about it. And one way you can do it without having to take as much of a beat is if you kind of have some proactivity behind it. So I'll give you an example. When I'm done today's presentation, I'm done, having this discussion. If I look at my to-do list, I'm not going to necessarily tackle a project. I'm going to go, well, how do I feel right now? I'm kind of tired. Okay, what are all the things I can do when I'm tired? Like I have that lined up for me. Not everybody does. I'm a bit of a geek when it comes to this stuff. So I am technically switching to low energy tasks, which is a pause from, let's say, what my theme for today is, which is media, which is mean I should be doing video and podcasting and all that stuff. So the pause can be personalized, to your point. But I think that we undervalue the 30 seconds that we could take between and going, is this the right thing for me to do right now? And when you're stuck and you're procrastinating, that pause of asking questions, because that's really what we're looking at here. What can I do? How am I running? That kind of stuff needs to happen instead of just, kind of just constantly going, doing. Because if we do that, then we don't end up being who we want to be and getting to where we ultimately want to go if we're constantly trying to do that.
And the other thing, I think that the way that Dudley is presenting it here is if you're switching and you're still being productive, there's a big difference between switching and watching TikTok.
Absolutely. Unless watching TikTok is part of the thing that you should be doing. So there's that too, right?
It's not. It
can be.
Okay. Question. Amy is asking for your recommendations for your favorite books on overcoming procrastination. You shared like 8 of them with us. Which one? Pick one.
I would say that,
it's seasonal, isn't it? It depends on what your challenge is at the moment.
It does, because I could say Rory Vaden's Procrastinate on Purpose, and I could say Frank Portnoy's Wait, but I mean, I think that it depends on the mindset that you're in right now, right? Like, I mean, you could read David Foster. Oh gosh, man, so blown out. But this is Water. By the way, this is the needlepoint that I told you that my niece made for me. So
there we go.
But I think that sometimes a book about procrastination that you read may not even be about procrastination at all, right? It could be about something else that reminds you, oh my God, I should be doing this thing.
Because our triggers are so varied. Perfectionism, for the perfectionist procrastination, the issue with procrastination is very, very different than somebody who is who has another kind of underlying issue.
Yeah, you could argue that you should read On the Shortness of Life by Seneca because he reminds you how short life is, and that might help you with your procrastination, right? Like there's so many different ways to look at it. I say if you want to look at somebody who's really written about the science of procrastination more than most, Tim Pitchell has, I mean, I think it was the University of Waterloo in Canada. He wrote a lot. He had a whole podcast called I Procrastinate. Like it's Pitchell, Pychyl. I mean, he was a formal, like, and we're talking back when I was first starting out with my productivity journey. He was one of the foremost experts in procrastination. I think that he's a good place to start. I mean, but again, to your point, Steve,
I'll get you to send me the list of books that you have, and we'll send it out in the follow-up resource.
Absolutely.
Notes.
Absolutely.
Raj is getting a little, I think for a lot of people, they don't recognize the difference between productivity and procrastination. So he's saying, is breaking something down the same principle as advocated in Getting Things Done by David Allen?
Yes, because David would talk about this idea, and I'll give you a great example. David and I've had a few conversations about this, and one thing he is adamant about is there's no such thing as a subtask. A task is a task is a task. He hates subtasks. I mean, let's put it this way. He hated them when I talked to him. He may have softened his stance on it in more recent years because now we're seeing a lot more subtasks and apps, because a task technically is a single action. So he argues, and I do as well. Like if you are looking at a task and it says go grocery shopping, that's technically a project, right? So you could go as granular as you want with breaking things down. The funny thing is that whenever I give this advice, is people say, well, now thanks, Mike. Now my to-do list is so long that how am I going to get it all done? Number one, it's no longer than it was before. It's just visible, right? It's just more visible. And secondly, you get to decide how deep you need to go down that rabbit hole, because if you've done webinars like Steve has time and time again, then he may not need to break it down as much as say me, who has rarely done one, right? But so it again, it's subjective. So yes, breaking things down is definitely a principle that originates, well, it doesn't originate in Getting Things Done, but it's definitely highlighted there. But the point is that if you look at something and you start asking questions like, there's no way I can get this all done today, then the question is it something that anyone could possibly get done today? And if not, what elements of it could you get done? Because there's nothing more gratifying than be able to go write 500 words of book and cross that off your list, as opposed to looking at a to-do list that says work on book. And you're like, I didn't work on my book today, man. I'm an idiot. I feel so much shame. I feel so much regret, because that's what can happen.
Yeah. We end up judging ourselves a lot. Do you consult people that have identifiable personality traits like ADD and ADHD as having different challenges regarding procrastination than people who don't have that personality?
So in my experience, and again, I'm not, I know people who, and I've talked to people who, have studied people with ADHD. One of the biggest things that ADHD people should use is a list. Like lists help because there's an element of focus to them. And then creating filters within that list allows them to focus on more specific things, so they can group those tasks together. Another area that people don't take into account are people who have energy level, issues, whether it's brought on by, say, an accident of some sort or some kind of, and you might have heard of like the spoons theory, like I only have so many spoons per day and things like that. Well, again, breaking those things down, because that's friction, right? Like I only have so much energy in the day. How do I get my stuff done? Well, if you have these number of spoons, figure out what tasks will take so many spoons. And by the way, that can differ from day to day. Again, it's not the same every single day. That breaking things down can help with that. So yes, different, and the pauses might have to be longer, and the level of precision might be different. Like the way they operate might be different. And again, operating doesn't always mean like what you do. It's when you do it, right? I'm a night owl. I do better creative work at night. So if I look at my list and I'm procrastinating, I'm like, Mike, you're procrastinating on your writing. Well, yeah, because I do that better later. So is that procrastination or is that being deliberate, right? So it's very nuanced. And I think that when people have, concerns like, again, attention deficit issues. And by the way, attention is a big problem that we all face. It's just different levels for different people. And then energy issues, like we should look at those as, how do we work within those, as opposed to how do we conquer them? Because, that's not gonna, the end game on that is not going to be a very good one.
I like that. A lot of people say I have to overcome my procrastination problem. You're always going to have it. You got to learn to live with it.
Yeah, it's like work-life balance. People go, "Oh man, I can't wait to have work-life balance." I'm like, balance is always tenuous. Like, no one is perfectly balanced 100% of the time. That's why it's called balance. So if you can just,
So if you follow the breaking things down rules, then discipline comes in, because eating the frog, the concept that you're going to do your least desirable tasks first. It's funny that they eat the frog. When I was a kid, my mother was the worst cook on the planet. She used to take peas and she would boil them for like 15 minutes, a can of peas, boil them, and they wonder why I didn't like vegetables. But all I would do at dinner time is, I knew I had to eat them. I would always eat them first. Right. Yep. Get that task, get the unpleasant task out of the way. So consequently, my mom thought I liked them, I guess. So it was a bad situation. But that having the discipline, if you're breaking it down, the confidence that that you're going to get to the more pleasurable tasks if you go through the less desirable ones at the beginning, is a good habit to get into.
Absolutely. And I mean, we see somebody in the chat talking about taxes and things like that. Like, instead of waiting to do like your taxes at the beginning of February or April or whenever you're doing them, if you spent 5 minutes a day, 5 minutes a week, every week of the year, if you wanted to, and again, I'm just giving an example, it would be far less bitter of a pill to swallow than if you waited until April 29th to do it. Right. Again, this is a version of time dilation, of all these cognitive biases that affect us, from either saying, "Oh, I have a lot of time. Oh my God, I don't have any time." Like, there's lots of things that play a role here. And if we can just anybody can break down projects into smaller components. Anybody can take a break if they want to. Anybody can look at a task and go, "How do I do this in the most precise way possible?" It just, our ability to do it varies from day to day, and how we approach it, if we try to be consistent in a sustainable way. And I think that's the other thing too. We hear a lot about consistency, but trying to be consistent with things that are not sustainable will automatically undermine your consistency. So you have to think about, like, how do I make this sustainable so I can do this? Maybe I'm not going to work on my taxes every week for 5 minutes a week. Maybe I'm only going to work on them for 20 minutes once per month, right? Like, what does it, and that takes thoughtfulness and slowing down. And, again, avoiding this prospect of checking off as many boxes as possible and going, "That's my day and it was productive," and going, "Did I check off the right boxes?" And procrastination is often a result of us, this came up already once, us going, "I want to have the perfect day. How do I get the perfect day?" The pursuit of perfection is, and I learned this from Costco, from Jim Sinegal, pursuing perfection is idiocy. We want to strive for excellence. And and one way you can strive for excellence is, again, breaking things down and saying, "Okay, how do I do this the best way I can? And at what time am I best suited to do this?" But we have to kind of take some agency over those brief moments, and we get them. I know people say, "Oh, I don't have the luxury of slowing down." Again, that's a fallacy. We do. You just need to decide which ones can I slow down now, and then future-proof it maybe a little bit too. It's such a nuanced thing, Steve.
For creatives, it becomes a slightly different problem too, right? I mean, there's a gestation period for an idea, for a piece of content that you're creating. And so I often wonder, as I'll create an idea for a video or for a webinar, and it'll be on my to-do list or in my system for quite a bit of time, quite often, before it finally seems to have gone through its maturation process till I'm ready to do it. Once you're ready to do it, I always look at it that at that point there, the procrastination issues are on the mechanical pieces of making it happen.
Yeah.
But getting to the point that in my mind, this piece of creative content that I want to create is ready for me to share, that I'm happy with it. I guess you run the risk of, if you're going through a bit of a artistic dry spell or creative dry spell, that you start to worry that you're actually procrastinating instead of just going through your own process.
Yeah. And what's interesting is that with any intention that we have to have a way to pay attention to it. So for example, one way I know that my writing is, my ideas are, I'm a wellspring of ideas, is I use drafts on my iPhone. So like that thing you saw the two things you saw on the slideshow, I think one was a tweet and one was just a random idea, which again, misspelling and everything, but that's because that's what form it takes when I first have the idea. Those originated in drafts, and one is no longer in drafts, one is published, and one is sitting in drafts, and it's got it's tagged with this idea of writing. Like it's just tagged. So I actually have in my to-do list application a tag, a reminder of, hey, go look at drafts for those things, right? So any productivity is, and we've had this discussion before, but productivity is not about efficiency and effectiveness on its head. Those are byproducts. I don't care what the dictionary says. Productivity is about the active linking of intention and attention. I'm going to do this. How am I going to pay attention to this? And I demonstrated that with the slideshow today. My intention, build a slide deck. How am I going to build a slide? I need to break it down. I failed to do that. My intention is to get this done. And all of a sudden the time gets closer and closer. My intention is to send the edited version to Steve. How am I going to pay attention to that? Well, you probably need to give Steve a bit more notice than, 30 minutes before the webinar. So again, the outcome isn't what was desired. And again, not going to get that every single time either. Right. And I will say, utmost first, I showed my son the slide deck, not the video, because he didn't get the construct of the value, but he saw the slides and he said, wow, that looks like what my friends could do in grade 6. He literally said that. And I'm like, yep. And that's part of that. And I said, but he's also seen some of my other slideshows that have been presented, also written out, by the way, but done completely differently with animations and things like that. And you and I've had discussions about this before too. So at the end of the day, my intention is to work on a book. Okay, how are you going to pay attention to it? And that's all. And the more precise you get with those intentions, then the more precise you get with your attention, the more productive you'll be, right? Because you'll also figure out what you don't need to do. And then that will help you, get out of this idea that procrastination is inevitable. Instead, it's like just something that you have to navigate, right?
Well, this has been eye-opening, Mike. Thank you so much. You've got did you put down something for? Oh no, you put it down for today. The link that you shared for your doobie-doobie-doo thing.
Yep, it's called, so the sheet in there that you get for free is called the starting 6. And it is an element of you saying, hey, I'm going to break these things down and when am I going to do it? So it's about what you're going to do and decide when to do it. And you could just print one off and make a bunch of copies of it and say, here's what I'm going to do. Just, if you can get
thank you, Tiffany.
Yeah, if you can just get, thank you, Tiffany. If you can just get 6 things of your intentions, everybody else's intentions, you're going to handle because the demands are louder. Make yours louder. Okay, here are 6 things I want to do. When am I going to do them? Break it down over, either do it daily or break it down over the course of the week. Doesn't matter. But put it in front of you, and that way you'll pay attention to it. So that's a free thing for everybody. I call it the starting 6.
I especially appreciate you coming in today because I know you're playing hurt. with the Bengals. It's Mike is the biggest Cincinnati Bengal fan in Victoria, BC, and maybe in Canada. And I got to admit, you're dealing with it really well.
Yeah.
Well, you even posted a congratulatory post in Facebook on Sunday. I was very impressed.
I am choosing to look at the fact that this team, which has been collectively known by many as the Bungles for many, many years, are the AFC champions, and they have a lot of promise. It's hard to get to that game. Don't know if they'll get back, but they look very promising. So the future is bright, which is good because all of the other teams I cheer for, the future has not been bright for a while.
And now you've got something to look forward to. If they'd won the Super Bowl, what would you have to look forward to? So there you go.
Exactly. And the fact that I was able to watch football, to me, that mattered in mid-February, I'm going to celebrate all that all day long, right? So,
I got to tell you, being friends with Mike with a circle of friends on Facebook, there was much concern for Mike there was all sorts of posts with the scores, and Mike Vardy was tagged in each and every one of the posts as his many friends were following to see how it went. And then radio silence. The minute the game was over, nobody said a word. Just quiet.
Yep. Yeah, and it was a great game. It was a great game. It was a blowout. It might have been a bit more painful.
If you're a fan of one of the teams, it was a great game. For the rest of the world, it's a pretty boring game.
Sorry. Yeah. The second half, I'm like, when are they going to score again? And that's kind of the way. The last few minutes were exciting. The refs were getting their workouts in. They were throwing more things than the players were. But
we won't even go there. Next week, folks.
Steve, I really appreciate. By the way, I really appreciate it, and thanks for indulging in my experiment. I appreciate it. And again, I as much as I was feeling anxious watching that football game, I didn't mean to put you through that same kind of anxiety leading into the day.
It was I can handle that. Next week, folks, special time. Tim Schmoyer, who is from Video Creators Labs, is one of the most brilliant YouTube creators. When I first started on YouTube, his was the advice that I followed as I started to build my YouTube channel. And Tim and I are going to have a conversation about the current state of video, specifically YouTube, but also the future of video, especially talking about asynchronous video and how we're starting to use video in a lot of different ways. But it's going to be a special time because Tim has to go to a speaking engagement in the afternoon. So we will be starting at our old Webinar Wednesday starting time, 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern next week. So the registration will be sent out to you. The registration page will be live in a few hours. So join us next week for Tim Schmoyer. Mike Vardy, we appreciate you, and good luck to Grace on her driving test today. Tell her from the whole DottoTech community. Oh, you're muted.
Thanks. She owns a car, so she wants to be able to actually drive it finally. So fingers crossed.
Thank you. Okay, till next time, folks. Thank you so much. April, thanks for the support in chat for all of you. Till next time, have fun storming a castle.